Hello and welcome, everybody. I'm really delighted to have you all here. My name is Catherine Rake, and I'm the founder and one of the consultants at Lucent Consultancy. We work with social purpose organisations, supporting them to make greater impact in the world through their strategies and their governance. And that's what we're here to discuss today. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by two very experienced chairs, both of whom we've had the pleasure of working with over the years. But before I get them to introduce themselves, let me just talk through the structure of this. We're going to start by some introductions and then by talking through what is actually how René and Moira have managed strategic shifts within their organisation and what the chair's role is in supporting organisations through a period of change. We're then going to go on to that hot topic we know about how you manage the division between chair and board and the executive, and make sure that that's a productive relationship with productive tensions in it. And then we're going to finish off by talking about how you build the board as a team and work with all of the trustees. I've also asked René and Moira to share some tips with you right at the end. So we'll have a session at the end where they share their top tips. Just to say, please do introduce yourselves in the chat. We know we've got lots of people from lots of different backgrounds. We'd love to know more about you. And we will have an opportunity for questions from you, from the audience, a little bit later. So could you either pop those in the Q&A box or in the chat box as those pop into your heads, because we'd love to throw those in René and Moira's direction. So Moira, René, over to you to introduce yourselves. And the introductory questions I've got for you is, what motivated you in the first place to become a chair? Any standout moments from your chairing experience, and what in your chairing role really keeps you awake at night? And I'm going to pass to you, Moira, first for those questions.
Thanks, Catherine. It's a pleasure to be here. When you set those questions for us, it wasn't hard to think about motivation for me, actually. I think there were three key things. One is about a passion for the work in some shape or form. One is about belief in the team. I've been extremely lucky to work with phenomenal executive teams, and I think that's been a pleasure and something that draws me to that sort of work. And the other was actually a sense that I could add some value, I could be useful in some way. And I think that two-way exchange is a really important component of being a charity chair, and thinking about that. So I chair two organisations at the moment, which is probably one too many, and somebody might ask me that question. I chair Clore Leadership, which is a small but mighty charity with a turnover of just under 2 million. It's got a small team. It's a nationwide programme. Chief exec when I joined, who was ambitious for change, and I thought I could help enable the charity. I had benefited from that charity, so I had been a Clore Fellow and gone through one of their programmes. So it was something I had previous experience of, so that passion and connection was absolutely there. And I also chair Factory International, which I've been doing for 2 years. So at Clore, I was there for 7 years, chair at Factory for 2. And I think the difference there is that there is a very big growth agenda for that organisation. It's moving from a biennial festival to a year-round operation with a multi-million-pound venue. It's got a turnover of about 25 million. It's regionally significant and nationally significant. And I think that scale was something that I also lent into. I studied in the city. It's based in Manchester. It's where I studied. And when I studied, it was not a place where you could easily find work. So being part of a project which is about changing the narrative in a city that I absolutely love felt really important and very enticing. In terms of standout moments from chairing, I think beyond the general, which for me they've been things like watching chief execs grow in confidence and thrive in their roles. And there's been something about seeing the impact of the work, actually being part of that process. And there's been something about anniversary moments, and getting that kind of feedback has been wonderful. A couple of standout moments for me. One was Clore Leadership celebrating its birthday. We did throw a party. I was, as chair, felt it was really important that we did throw a party, and it was a very successful event. And it was full of warmth and love for our founder, but also for the quality of the work that we had delivered. So that was a really lovely moment of seeing that impact, but also getting that external validation for the service that we had been providing to a sector over a 20-year period. The other standout moment is something rather nuanced, which was that over the summer, it's been a pretty tempestuous time in cultural sectors. There's been a lot of conversation about values and enacting values. And my chief exec and I were part of a meeting of chairs and chief execs in Manchester, talking about how do we navigate this very complex situation. We might talk about that a bit more later. But the standout moment for me was that I was on one table, my chief exec was on another table. We were both asked on our tables to talk about a particular issue. And when we came to report back, we both had said exactly the same thing in response to a particular challenge. And somebody else said, I can't believe that you've got exactly the same narrative. That stand out for me because it wasn't an accident. It was based on building a trusting relationship. It was based on a lot of quite uncomfortable conversations. And so to be aligned with my chief exec in that way felt really powerful. Lastly, what keeps me awake? I think everyone expects you to say it's the money as a chair, but that's not it for me. It's that I do a bad job, and that the charity can't deliver on its objectives and what it's there to do, and or that anything to do with our people.
Mhm.
So that the services we provide aren't good enough, the health and safety of our operations fail in some way, the experience of our employees is less than optimal. All of those things are things that make me very anxious. I want us to be good in terms of our relationships and connections to people.
Brilliant. Thank you, Maura. Got us off to a roaring start. René, over to you.
I was in publishing as a chief executive for about I was chief executive for about 25 years and in publishing for about 35 years. And I realized in thinking about this, I've actually been in the third sector as a chair and non-executive for about nearly 25 years now. And I've been a serial chair. I mean, I think must be some kind of compulsion. I'm sure, I could be diagnosed for reasons of, why I do this, but 6 different charities in that time, all of them really different, all of them important. And all of them, I mean, you don't take a job like that unless you think the chief executive is somebody you can work with. I think that's the kind of starting point. Why do I do this? Why am I so keen on this? I think the chair is in a really privileged, special position vis-a-vis the chief executive. The chief executive, and I've been there, is making decisions all the time, crisis, and they're kind of thinking about the data. A chair, relatively or in comparison, can take more time to reflect, to think longer term, to slow things down, and I really enjoyed that, having been one of these kind of give me a decision. I haven't made a decision in 3 minutes. Give me some other problem. So it actually takes some time to think about how you do innovation, how you do change, how cultures change. And I actually took a year or two myself out during the time I've been chairing charities and developed a course on that. I thought, I don't know really how you do innovation, particularly in the third sector. Why don't I go and study and find out? And I taught a few courses on that. The way to learn something, obviously, is to decide you're going to teach it. And I found that really, really helpful. Now, what motivates me, why I get involved, I guess the themes that cut across what I've done are heritage, culture, environment, industrial agriculture is a big problem in our world today, and that's obviously been a factor in the causes I've chosen to back. I'm very concerned about animal welfare and all of that. As I've been fortunate enough to find organizations that bundle those things up for me. But what I really get excited about when I get involved with an organization is to say, okay, this organization is doing fantastic work. is it doing the most good it can do? Could it do something more? Is it using its resources to maximum effect? Is it thinking really in the longest term? And I always think that strategy is not really about the present. We often think we're solving a present problem. Well, it's a moving target. We're really solving a problem that's coming over the horizon. It might change, might mutate. So I always say, a strategy is always emergent. You should be prepared to change your strategy, in a moment if new facts emerge or the external environment changes. But you should always start with your original purpose. Why were you founded? What was that? Go back in time first, and then go as far forward in time as you can to say, okay, how can we make sure we're going to be having the most impact, not today, but 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from now? And once you've got that perspective, that broad past and future in front of you, you can then say, okay, this strategy that we've been pursuing up till now, is it actually fit for the future? Is it actually true to our original purposes and principles? And is it actually going to be fit for the future? I'll move on now. I will talk about another organization. I'm going to talk about a really negative experience that I had. And I think I'm talking out of terms if I talk about the RSPCA, a wonderful organization, great history, just celebrated its 250th anniversary, but it was very public knowledge, I think 5-6 years ago, that it had gone through a really rough patch. A string of CEOs, lots of briefing externally against each other by board members, accusations of bullying, and it was publicly in the naughty corner of the Charity Commission. And I joined it when for the first time, they brought in seconded third-party executives rather than have all of the membership of the board be elected by its broader membership. And I went in at the same time when the new chief executive came on board. And I think I was shocked at how bad the etiquette and behaviors were, that people were talking at each other, over each other, accusing each other of nefarious activities and bad behavior. And I realized that actually, if that basic respect and trust is not there, it doesn't matter what else you try to do. So although when I was there, we tried to refocus the RSPCA to think more about prevention rather than remedial work, and to think more about the biggest problem we could see on the horizon, which was the rise of factory farming, more and more animals being put into sheds and being consumed and used by humans as income levels, right? But those were the big problems we needed to shift our focus onto. Still, before we could do that, we had to address the kind of cultural issues within the organization and the etiquette. So getting those things right, if you don't have that machinery and that trust in it, you have no hope in hell of achieving a strategic shift or transformation in your organization. So I'll tell you, I'm just giving you a moment of kind of, whoa, this is really difficult. This is really important, and you can't just jump into a strategy. I'll tell you the thing that worries me most today. It's not anything to do with my behavior or the board's behavior or the National Trust, which I chair now, strategy. It's actually public view about the future. I cite to people the Edelman Trust Barometer, which is published every year. There's an international survey. They asked people in individual countries, is the world going to be a better place for the next generation or not? And I remember growing up thinking most of my peers and we thought we were making a better world out there. Only 14% of Britons today think that the next generation is going to have a better life than we have today. And I think this loss of hope, this loss of exploration, of aspiration even, because of course that leads to apathy. If you think the world's going to go to hell in a handbasket, what are you going to do? You don't do anything about it. You think, well, I can't control that. I can't have an impact. And that apathy, that lack of agency that I feel particularly young people have today is the thing that I worry most about in our world today.
Brilliant. Okay. And I mean, interestingly, on that last point, we're hearing increasingly charities and other third sector organisations talking about creating spaces of hope and spaces of safety. So that really resonates with what we're hearing. So we're going to dive into this issue about what is the chair's role in supporting organisations to have impact, reinventing themselves, making shifts in the way that they work. So René, I'm going to turn to you first. Could you just talk us through what you've actually done in order to manage a kind of big shift within an organisation? What have you done from the chair role?
Well, I mean, I think like Moira, I am attracted to organizations that work at scale, and we've got lots of these. The National Trust is a huge organization. And of course, the image of a tanker comes to mind when you're trying to change its direction. And it has an incredibly strong history, an incredibly strong culture of support and engagement, and everyone welcome. And it has this wonderful mantra or motivating spirit, which is about we're here for everyone, forever. So what we did when we started to look at our new strategy, we said, okay, that is fantastic. There's nothing we want to change. That's our aspiration. Are we doing that? Is our current activities, the way we use resources, is that actually doing it? We said, well, hold on. We got this organization, which was very good at getting us to wait and take our time. So the first bit of advice is you can't rush at a big strategic change. So we basically said, okay, let's look at the outside world that we're trying to influence, because our whole initial purpose is to provide a benefit to everyone in the nation. And we want that to be ongoing, future generations as well. That was a big part of our new thinking. It isn't just about providing benefit today, it's about ensuring we can provide a benefit in the future. We said we have to start with the external environment. And the way we started was to look at trends and look at what was happening in the outside world. A lot of it not very good, not very positive in terms of funding and engagement, and people living in cities and things, away from places of heritage and nature. And we asked 70,000 people to tell us, took us a whole year to tell us what they wanted from the future, what they wanted and what they thought perhaps the National Trust might be able to do. And out of that, we having turned the telescope the other way around and started thinking, how can we use our places to better effect? How can we welcome more people to our places? We said, no, actually, we need to think about what is happening outside our places and actually what the rest of the world wants from us. And we stopped thinking about our assets being physical assets and membership and a big income, and we started thinking about it being more our ability to convene, our ability to influence, our ability to collaborate and engage. And we started thinking about a lot of the benefit that we're going to have to provide doesn't have a business plan attached to it. So you've got to start with the value proposition first, and not think, oh my God, how am I going to get paid for that? You've got to start about who your beneficiaries are and what benefit you could provide them. And then surprisingly, we found the business model stuff is kind of falling into place behind it. So our strategy is not a strategy for the National Trust, and it might be hubris on our part. It's a strategy for the nation. It's what the nation needs, and it's turn around the decline in nature, which has been going on forever. Stop the restricted access to nature and heritage, which is becoming more and more restricted as time goes by, more of an elitist activity, and inspire more people to care about these things and take action to protect them for future generations. So that's the strategic shift that we've made. It's not about using our own places to maximum effect. It's not about providing a benefit to members who are incredibly important. We want them to have a great time. It's about the nation as a whole.
Brilliant. Okay. And so I'm going to come back to you, René, in a sec about, what the specific contribution of the chair is under those circumstances in terms of setting ambition. But Moira, a strategic shift, a big change within an organisation, what have you done as chair to help deliver that?
Yeah, I sit and listen to René and think, oh gosh, wouldn't it be great to have all of those assets and resources to be able to do that kind of exercise? And I suppose I'm working with organizations at different scales. So I think the simple answer is that I think the role of the chair is to create the right environment in which around the board table to ask the right questions, actually, and to ask for the right information as well. And René's done a really good example, articulation of there. Where do you find the information? How do you start to think about that and gather it? And then to lead the organization through a process of decision making. The biggest example I'm working on at the moment is at Factory International. And as I said at the beginning, we're moving from biennial festival to year-round operation. We're moving from largely a small staff base with people who come together for festival to something that requires a different approach. And we, like René, went right back to purpose. Who are we? What are we there for? The kind of overarching words were that we're here to invent tomorrow together. So actually, we're a hopeful organisation on looking to that future already. I think what we've done in thinking about strategy is really think about what's the change that we want to see in the world, and then the how do we think we can do that best. And obviously, we have gone out and talked to all of our stakeholders and our youth forums and our people forum, and all of those sorts of people have been part of the story. For me, one of the things that I thought was really interesting in the way that we've done that is also actually opening that up to our staff in a really profound and meaningful way, which is not something as a chief exec, I think I would have said I did. But I think the team at Factory have taught me something about how to do that in a very generous spirit. And it's been wonderful to see how much the staff have then engaged. And because they're delivering at the front line, they're the ones who know what's working and what's not working and where the impact is happening and where it's actually not happening. So I think that's been really fascinating. I think that René touched on it, that the role that I've been able to play, I think, is partly about toggling between what needs to happen now to make sure that we're resilient and how do we want to achieve long-term ambition, and keeping those two things in balance at the board. I think it can be very easy for the board, in their role as accountable citizens, custodians of the charity, to get stuck in the here and now and the danger of the here and now. So the ability to lift your head up and out has been and to hold that space. A couple of my board members, when we started looking at strategy, perhaps they come from the more commercial world, if I can characterize them, we're saying, what do you mean we're going to spend a day talking about vision and fluffy stuff? We've got someone external coming in to tell us about trends and things, but we don't understand. We're not artists. We don't understand that. My world is the cultural sector. This is a waste of our time. Actually, I think we collectively got to a place of understanding that we needed to create that space for ourselves as a board, but also for the executive, actually, who, as René said, are making decisions every day and running to stand still and, doing the swan thing with the paddling under the water. I think one of the other things that's been really helpful is something that you said to me, Catherine, which is moving from a model of compliance as a chair. Are we doing the right things? Have we looked at this? Have we looked at that? To something which is more strategic and more generative, and to doing that in a quite deliberative way. And I had coincidentally done a coaching course at the same time. And the conversation there had been about how do you create space for people to breathe and to process enough so that they can genuinely think about what's the right question to be asking here, and not jump to, as René said, the delivery model, the business model straight away, go back one step. It feels a bit self-indulgent, but actually it's not. It's fundamental to building something that's got collective energy behind it. The other thing I think has been really important in developing the strategy has been to move from a conversation about risk mitigation to one about risk appetite. And I use that phrase all the time now in my governance roles, because when times are tough and you are juggling restructuring, money issues, all of those things. Again, I think for boards who aren't there all the time following the business, it can be very easy to get into a place of saying we've got to mitigate the risk. And I think that's very dangerous for charities who are purpose-led and mission-led. And we really have to think about what I think you called it the value proposition, René. What are we here to do? You know, what's the fundamental? If we fail in those things, what are we here for? We might as well not exist. So I think as a chair, that means there is a trust that you have to develop with the executive team. You have to believe the information they're bringing to you. So perhaps you're part of the information gathering in those instances. You're not just relying on somebody else bringing it to you. I think there's openness and respect for the insight that trustees can bring into those strategic conversations as well as the executive. I've been a chief exec. I know I've shut down those conversations sometimes, rather belittlingly looking back on it now. Our trustees are there for a reason, and actually to create the space where they can add and bring that conversation in. Yeah, that's probably enough for me at the moment.
Brilliant. Okay, so there's some fantastic kind of common threads there that I'm hearing from both of you about opening that space for discussions around purpose, taking a long-term view. I heard from both of you this desire to prompt people to work outside in rather than from introspection out, and take the long view in all of that, and be responsive to beneficiaries. And I think that point about risk appetite hugely important as well. So René, I said I'd come back to you. So on this specific, like the specifics of the chair's role.
So let me pick up this point on risk, because I think this is a really interesting one. So when I became involved with the National Trust, I mean, people will know that it was going through a kind of rough time in public, being, I feel, unfairly seen as some kind of culture warrior, used as a bit of a whipping boy for certain reasons that I only vaguely understand. But it had become it was so shocking to the wonderful people, and they are wonderful people in the natural, who think they're doing good things all the time, to be accused of things that they thought were unfair and nefarious, that it had kind of created some sense of overcaution and maybe a bit of paralysis even in the organization. Certainly was a distraction from doing the job, doing the most good you can do, and having an impact. I think they all recognize that. So I think the first thing to do was to basically kind of put that to bed and say, this is a sideshow. It's a passing flood. You're a big organization. Of course, you're going to draw brickbats and fine. Let's let people criticize us. Let's take the good things they have to say to us. It's fine. We'll learn from that. But let's develop a bit of a thick skin and say, I know there are certain things we believe in. We're going to carry on doing. And then we went out and checked with the public, and trust levels had gone up, recognition levels had gone up. So I mean, we were kind of misinterpreting the signals from the outside, and that had actually permeated the board a bit and made I think the executive feel perhaps it didn't really have the complete trust and support of the board. So getting that relationship back in the right place was important. So the two things that I think were really important. One is the board was used to getting quite far advanced documents from the executive on policy issues and on strategy issues. And the board was frustrated. The trustees were frustrated. They wanted to be in at the creation and then leave the fine tuning later on to the executive. So we created a bit of inversion. Let's start with the open-ended questions. Everybody's on the same page. Let's take our time to explore those questions. People might be slower than others, so people might have second thoughts. So we reiterated again and again in the diamond shape that you brought to us from Lucid, Catherine, of okay, open it up, close it down, open it up, close it down. So we took a lot of time to say, what are the questions that we really want to address? And actually, I was surprised at how quickly, once we did that, once it was completely open, we came to a consensus. And then we had the moment of truth where we talked about risk, Moira, and we had risk can be is that it covers a myriad of things. And I'm in favor of not having a risk register, but having a risk and opportunities register. So you don't forget that there are things you could be doing that could make life better and that you should be pursuing in positive ways, not just all the time mitigating against risk. And that makes us more hopeful and positive. But we actually had a thing where we sat around, everybody amongst the trustees had to say what their risk appetite was from 1 to 10, with 10 being right out there on the edge, free floating and bring it on, to 1, 2 being, we need to be very conservative. We're here forever. We need to guard our resources very carefully. And the average score amongst the trustees, it blew the executive away, was a 9. And so we blew all of us away. We said, okay, so we really are prepared to be more ambitious. And I picked up a couple of phrases, words that I keep repeating about how the organization wanted to see itself, how the qualities we wanted to nurture. And they were ambitious, generous, and confident. And so I kept saying, that's what we want to be in our strategy: ambitious, generous, and confident. And once we were all there in the same boat, and the executive knew that they weren't going to find that going out of the trenches, going towards the goal, up taking the hill, and find that the trustees are still back there. So, well, I'm not really sure we should be doing. And we convinced them that we were going to be with them all the way in the journey, and we weren't going to, bolt the minute we got criticism from the outside world. I think that just released a whole degree of honesty and openness and ambition in the organization that surprised me. And I think, Catherine, you were witness to that, probably surprised you as well.
And I think there's something in there, isn't there, about how chairs and boards more generally can lend courage to organisations, actually, because, you've both been chief execs. It's pretty tough at times when you're right up against it. But actually, the board's ability to take that longer term perspective and lend courage. So I'm going to segue into exactly that meaty topic. There is almost like a law of physics that when you get more than one chief executive of a social purpose organisation gathered in a room, within a couple of minutes, the issue of their board emerges, and not always in the most flattering terms. And you have both been chief executives, and you know what it feels like to have your toes trodden upon, to have asks that don't feel productive, etc., etc. But we also know that it doesn't need to be that way. So how have you worked as chair to make sure that you haven't muddied those boundaries, that you've offered the right amount of support and challenge, and that you've given permission, as you've talked about, to different kinds of conversations? What have you done? So, Moira, over to you first on this. How as a former chief executive, how you've been mindful of kind of walking that tightrope.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I think governance is really important, and it sounds quite geeky to say that. And I think it's more important now as a chair than I did as chief exec. So I think there is a reality check here about maybe there's always a sense that if you're a charity and your trustees are meeting 4 times a year, it can feel like there's a drag on the business because you're, as René described, you're the chief exec, you're making decisions, and then you have to think, oh, hold on a minute, I've got to talk to the board. So trying to break that down is the fundamental thing that we're talking about. There are a couple of things for me. One is about boundaries, and these are quite techie things, but I think they're so important. So right at the beginning, in terms of relationships, what are the boundaries? Does everybody understand the roles? Do you have a scheme of delegation in place? Is accountability really clear in the organization? It's important for everybody because it underpins the way that you work. And one of those things I think is about, I've been learning, is about the fact that the chair isn't the boss of the organization and isn't actually the boss of the CEO either. The board is a collective entity, and the chair is the chair of the board, and the board have collective responsibility for the charity. And I think a lot of challenge gets in the way when the chair forgets that collective responsibility and starts to act as though they are the leader, they are the thing. And that's a very delicate thing because you're talking about people's egos then, and we're all, we all have healthy egos. I think I don't think you should probably choose to be a chair if you don't have some ego in the mix somewhere. So keeping a lid on it is really important. I think, as René was touching on, respect and trust, the culture and tone that you create. And that is a chair responsibility to really think about where do you want to go. And I think if you've been a chief exec, you can really bring that into this conversation. So I want to create a space where there is a really collective sense of endeavour, that there isn't an us and them, that it doesn't feel as though the executive are coming in to report to the board like it's an exam. I was on a panel with somebody who cheerfully said, "Oh, I like my executive to feel a bit anxious every time they come into the board meetings." And I thought, crikey, that's exactly what I don't want. I don't want it to feel like that. There is power in play, and I think we have to acknowledge that and manage it. I also worked with a board who never smiled or welcomed the executive into the meeting. It's common courtesy, actually. You wouldn't behave like that in other circumstances. So it's about how we treat people and how we want to be treated in return. And then there's a couple of things specifically about the relationship with the executive. I think that sense of having the executives back that René described works two ways. So as a chair, I think the contracting I do with my chief exec is I don't want any surprises. I don't want to be in the board meeting and suddenly find that there is a real issue around the corner that you knew about and you've been trying to hide it and deal with it on your own. That's not what we want. So the communication flow becomes really important in this. The encouragement to have regular meetings with my chief exec, because that helps with that, but also to talk as and when is necessary. And I don't think if you're a trustee, you understand that the difference being a chair is that availability piece. So I think you have to be somebody your chief exec can bring up at any moment and say, I just need 5 minutes of your time. I just need to bounce something off you. It makes a massive difference to the quality of the conversation that then goes up on the board. And this is not about creating an exclusive type bubble, but it is about allowing someone to do the thinking through the issues. There's also something about just not undermining your exec in front of the whole board. And again, I've had that experience in the past where, people have been singled out, they've been made to feel small, and if you've got trust, you break it so quickly, and then it's really hard to rebuild it. And a lot of bad behavior creeps in on that. A quiet conversation is better than pointing out the obvious mistake in front of everybody else. The last thing I just wanted to talk about was actually committee structures and how much I think they are really useful things in terms of managing that relationship with the executive, not just the chief executive, but the wider executive, because they can act as a sort of pipeline for people to take ownership, both from the board side and from the executive side. And that's all about building relationships out, as well as sharing the load a bit, because it's some of this is heavy loading. I think it's also good because it then means you're not vesting everything in one person. So your chair of finance and audit has a really important role to play. We have a chair of people and culture who deals with the HR stuff. That's really important. We have a chair of ethics committee. All of those are different trustees. And it means that there is, again, this collective sense that you're building really, really strong terms of reference for each of those, and a real shared understanding that if it needs to, it comes back to full board. So the board is cited on all of those key important issues. And that is something I think you do learn as you go. What is it that needs to come back to board? Did we take a decision over there on the left-hand side, which actually left the board uncited, and they then felt disengaged from the business in some way?
Brilliant. So much in there. And actually really interesting, as you were speaking, Moira, a real connection between what you were saying earlier about risk appetite and that issue about the board not playing gotcha, which is what I hear all the time. Chief execs saying they played gotcha with me.
Yeah.
I'm like, because actually you cannot, can you say we want to take risk and then play gotcha? Those two things are in direct contradiction to one another. So that's a really interesting, I hadn't seen that connection before, but really, really well said. Just quickly before I turn to René, just a bit of housekeeping. We've now got our chat up and running, so please do introduce yourselves in chat. And we've begun to get some questions through. We're going to come to questions in not too long. So if you've got burning questions, then please do pop them in the Q&A and I will pass those to Moira and René in a sec. So René, how do you walk that tightrope?
Yeah, I can make my comments really short because I basically agree with everything that Moira said, really. I think this having a regular meeting with your chief executive, 20 minutes on a Friday afternoon, regular spot, and actually accept that you might get it 8 o'clock at night, a WhatsApp that says, oh, this is coming down the line, or do you have 10 minutes tomorrow? That's really important, and that you're completely honest. I'm not really very happy about X is happening. I didn't remember saying it in the meeting, but you can say it in that privately, and then your chief exec can say, well, yeah, I'm not happy about it either, or actually we need to understand there's this background. So you then understand, okay, is this something I need to get involved in or not? So that regular contact and feeling like there's no drift in knowledge or commitment or direction between the two of you is really important. Not that you can't disagree about stuff, but you, as you say, no surprises in a meeting. Never, any kind of I want to talk about this now. I'm demanding this. The chair that says, well, I insist that at the next meeting we do this is a bad chair, particularly if they do it in public. It's a negotiation. There are clear lines. The governance stuff is so important. It's like auditing. It's one of those things, gosh, it's a pain in the butt until it goes wrong. And then you say, oh, well, we should have got the governance right. Or yes, we missed the trick there. And then you're really sorry. And it's your fault as the chair, because that's your lookout. There are some really clear areas where it's the board's responsibility. I think the board does have to be the joint partner and maybe even pushing for the lead on the strategy formulation, the idea of where you want to go and roughly where resources are going to be allocated. And then it needs to get out of the way and not, get down into what's called into the weeds and micromanage. Once we formulated our strategy, we kind of had to step aside and give the executive a lot of free time and free space to execute it and restructure in the way that they needed to achieve that strategy and not be second guessing them. Just get reports, updates. Don't feel you have to micromanage that all the way down the line because they are closer to the action. They've got to call the shots as they see them, as they move through the implementation. And that's really important that you're not seen to be second guessing them all the time. We use, Moira, two things I use. One is I give my opinion to all the executive members privately about what they ought to be doing. And I always preface with, by the way, I'm not executive, and if you don't do this, I'm not going to be upset at all, but I just wanted to tell you because I had this great idea. And I'll then laughingly tell my chief executive that I've done it. That's fine, you keep doing that. If they think it's a good idea, they'll follow it up or they'll bring it to me or whatever. I'm not worried about that. As long as they know they don't have to do what you think is a good idea. And I said, that's absolutely right. What we do find is a way of keeping the ground clear so we can talk about the external environment, the stakeholders, and the governance of our strategy at every meeting, is we do use these task and finish groups. I find them better than a lot of standing committees. So, if we decide you've got a digital transformation you want to go through, a couple of trustees who are sitting alongside the exec occasionally to give them advice in a non-executive capacity about how they develop a digital strategy. That's a good thing. The trustee loves it. It keeps the board work a little bit lighter. And the executive usually finds it helpful. If they don't find it helpful, they can quietly say it's not helpful, and we'll disband that. And then when it's finished, and you develop a new task and finish group. But the final thing, which is really, really important, this has to be fun, exciting, interesting. You are the cheerleader in chief, So every time it's all right to be critical and say, well, I don't really know that I agree with that, or no, can we think again about this? It doesn't feel right to me yet. You have to also remind them gee, you've done really great work here. This is a fantastic thing that you're doing. Yeah, this is really difficult. Deal with the uncertainty. We don't know either. We're going to have some failures. Let's be honest about our failures and celebrate our victories. So you've got to create some excitement and passion and belief in them, because otherwise they're not going to believe in themselves or in your strategy. So I call myself the senior volunteer, the cheerleader in chief, and everybody laughs, but I mean it when I say that.
And there's a serious point in there as well, and because we're going to come to this point about how you build the board around you, which is, of course, you are all volunteers. You don't get paid for the time, and very considerable time sometimes that chairing an organisation can take. So making it fun for trustees and making it connected to the work, I know, has been a big part of how both of you have operated as well, because people have got to feel it, right? They've got to get the buzz of actually seeing the work in practice. So we're going to come on to this question about how do you build a really good board around you. And actually, we've had a great question from Madhu about how you've contributed to ensure you've got diverse, inclusive, intersectional governance of the charity. So I'm going to ask you about that, and then also ask you about how you've dealt with differences in views, any squeaky wheel issues that you've had on the board, and how you've managed those, and how you've managed, controversial conversations across your board. So, Moira, can I actually turn to you first in terms of, how do you build a team of trustees around you as chair, given, as you said, you're not the boss of it, you're the first amongst equals of a broader trustee team.
I do think there's a leadership role here, though, actually, and as chair, in setting the agenda and the culture around diversity and equity and inclusion, and why it's so important that we deal with that. The stats are really not good enough in our sector, particularly when you think about who the charities are serving, and they haven't improved dramatically either. So for me, saying that out loud is a really important thing to do. Talking about why board diversity is important, and then actioning through, it's very easy to go, it's really important, and do nothing about it. So I think that's thinking about recruitment, kind of who you want, where the gaps are, being really honest and open about that, but also about the quality of welcome that you are extending. And I think probably this is not naming boards that I'm currently involved with, but we've all seen examples of rather tokenistic recruitment and people joining boards and then being treated really dreadfully and having the most miserable experience and walking away and going, I'm never doing that again. And not only that, but they're not creating the pathway for others to join them. So I think working hard at it. Part of the conversation for us as a board, with both Factory and Clore, has been about how do we get voices from the people who are using our services onto the board genuinely, authentically, in a way that actually allows them to add value to the conversation and feel heard in that conversation. And that has really helped us think about diversity in many different forms. So that intersectionality piece becomes really interesting there. We have young trustees on our board. Somebody asked me the other day, how young? You can imagine who was asking me that question. So when I say young trustees, they're both in their 20s. The average age for trustees in the UK is something like 65 or 66. So they are representative of some of the communities that we are trying to serve and reach, and they bring such richness to our conversations and thought. And I love having both of them there. And we've done that in a quite deliberative way. We had one young person on the board, and actually we've gone to two, because it's nice to have a gang to be part of, and to feel like there's somebody else in the room who has something like you, actually. So the inclusion piece is really interesting. And I had a really good challenge from one of my board members about, when we say inclusion, do we really mean inclusion? Who are we welcoming into our buildings? Who are we welcoming into our services? Is it a particular kind of person because we're a particular kind of charity? And how do we make sure that we've got that breadth of experience in everything that we're doing? On the other issue about squeaky wheels and dealing with difference, I mean, I think it's worth saying that charities don't really like to disagree, and certainly out loud. I think it's in our sort of DNA, and actually that can create all sorts of problems because often there are actually quite profound disagreements that nobody's airing. And I think the role of the chair is to try and allow that to happen. So being prepared to admit when you haven't got something right, I think is a really important leadership trait, full stop. And it's really important for chairs to be able to do that and also to talk about the learning from it. So it's not just, hands up, I did that wrong, but actually this is what I'm going to do in response to that. But thinking about helping people speak. So acknowledging when you feel that there's something going on in the building or around the table and actually saying it. You seem frustrated. It looks as though you might disagree with what's being said. Not emotional, factual, and then giving people the space to actually be part of that conversation. I'm going to hand over to René because I need to get some water.
Right, just quickly on that. I think I've gone through a bit of a journey on this. I have to think, yes, this is the skills audit. This is what you need on your board. And then if it comes to it between getting somebody with a diverse background and somebody who is less diverse, then you go for I've actually, come full circle, partly because we have a council and we have 50 people and we brought a lot of young people from different ethnic backgrounds. And I've realized that the diversity itself, it's not just about fairness. That diversity of backgrounds and just history improves your decision making. It helps you make better decisions. Diversity per se, groups that have lots of different backgrounds within them make better decisions generally as groups. But that diversity just opens your mind to problems, issues, points of view you would not have thought otherwise. So I actually think the diversity is more important than satisfying the skills base now. In terms of the quality of the decision making you make, not in terms of just fairness and what's the right thing to do. So I've been on a bit of a personal journey there myself, and I think our board has been through that as well. And particularly if we're there for everyone forever, we've got to actually, believe and work on that. In terms of the squeaky wheels, just a couple of quick things on that. Let them squeak. It's good. Squeaky is good. It sounds, let them squeak. And actually, I sometimes say, come on, we're all agreeing with each other here a bit too much. Surely somebody's, has some reservations about this proposal. And we laugh a little bit and somebody will come up with it. I also do annual appraisals, which is basically a discussion point with the trustees, and I say, what do you want to talk about this year? What were you unhappy about last year? And then I do notes on that, and we really then go back, and they know that's going to have an influence. They can be anonymous or they can be attributable, and they feel like they can influence the agenda, and they can come back and say, I'm really not happy with that discussion we had. Can we talk about it again? Or can I talk to somebody who's directly responsible for implementing that? And you can make those things happen so that people feel their influence isn't just in that one moment in time in front of everybody else. And if somebody's hogging too much of the time, you just say, you're going to be much more quietly, you're going to be much more effective. You get to point 1 and point 2. By the time you get to point 6, they've forgotten your 2 most important points. So a little bit of private coaching and setting an example that when you speak for 2 minutes maximum. And on most issues, you make sure if somebody hasn't spoken on it and you have the time, you call them and say, hey, I'm sure you have a view on this as well. And sure enough, they do. They just think, we want to get on to the next agenda point. But actually, you've brought them on board. They might have picked up something nobody else has. So squeaky wheels are great. Private conversations are great. A little bit of private coaching with new trustees. But if the etiquette is there and the exchanges are fluent to begin with, people naturally slot into that when they join. They see what the behaviors are. But in general, I think more squeaking is better than less squeaking.
Yeah, and there was one other thing I just wanted to build on that, which is I think there is a chairing skill around not shutting conversations down too quickly and about bringing them to a close. So, and that's another bit of delicate balancing. But that's I've had a couple of really good chairs in my life who've been brilliant at saying, thank you everybody for your thoughts. What I've heard is this, and this. Where I think we have got to collectively is this. can I just have nods around the table before we go on to the next item? I don't want to be a chair who has to have votes around a board table.
Yeah.
I want there to be that sense of everyone feels heard, as René says, and we've reached a decision that everybody can stand alongside and behind.
And if you're not getting the affirmative nods like that, it's perfectly all right to say, hey, we need to come back to this and think
Yeah.
about it some more. You guys, you've raised some really interesting points. It's not a defeat. It's just a deferment to consider something really difficult for a little longer. And people are happy with that, and the executive is happy with that usually as well.
Fantastic. Okay, so I've got some great questions here. So the focus as a new chair, we've got a question here about what should you do in the first 6 months as a new chair of an organisation? What would be your advice? Who wants to take that one?
As little as possible, probably. You should really be listening. You should be in listening mode.
I was going to say the same. Listen, 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 unless there is a crisis.
Yeah.
And if there is a crisis, you're going to go into a different kind of mode. But if you're not in crisis mode, breathe. Don't think you have to fix everything. It's not your job as a chair to fix everything anyway. Create the environment in which you can hear what the concerns are, what the opportunities are, and let it sit with you for a while.
Yeah, and trust trust is something you have to build up over time. You can't go in there and say, trust me, I'm a decent person, ask so and so if you want. That's a start, perhaps, to get a good reference. But it's actually in the day-to-day and the interchange in your behavior. That's got to be at least 6 months before you really feel that you understand the organization and the organization accepts and appreciates you.
Brilliant. Okay, now I've got an interesting question here, which is, what do you believe are the most effective mechanisms in practice rather than theory, it says, for helping the chair themselves reflect on their effectiveness and make intentional changes in the best interests of board and organisational performance? So how and who is the place to give you the space as chairs to reflect on your
Can I answer that one more? Because I have a very short answer. What I do, I do an audit at the end of every meeting, and I say, well, did this work for this meeting work for every person in that meeting? Did everybody feel individually that they contributed and were valued? Did we get the job done that we were supposed to do? And did the team come away feeling good about the collective effort? And if you can't answer, tick, tick, tick on all of those, then you have some remedial work to do outside the meeting.
Yeah, I think we brought an external governance review in with one of the charities, and that wasn't because there was anything wrong, actually. It was because I just felt collectively we were all a bit comfortable and we could do with somebody's eye just to have a look at it. And that was really helpful for me as a chair. And I have vice chairs in both roles that I now do. There are very clear terms of reference for them about being the alternative to going to the chair. And that, I think, is an escape valve, potentially, if things are going wrong. And when we go to one-to-ones, which I also do with my trustees, there is the option, if they want to have a one-to-one with the vice chair rather than me as a chair, so that I am beginning to get some feedback in real time about who and what I'm doing and whether it's working or not. But if one of my trustees asked that question in the first place, they might be trying to tell me something.
Moira, does your vice chair do an appraisal of you?
Yeah, so that's the idea, is that we kind of have that loop going. It's a new role in both organisations. So I've had one in place for a year or two. The other one is a brand new thing. But I did some looking at the Association of Chairs has some very good resourcing online, and one of the things they talked about was why a vice chair can be important. And of course, when things are going swimmingly, it's kind of, it's fine and it's there. It's if there is a problem, there is an automatic way of at least starting to create the space to have a conversation.
Brilliant. Okay, so before we get to your tips, very quick fire on the last two questions. One, which is, trustee only time, yes or no? What's that? Is that useful? And the other is, what does a good exit and good handover look like? So we've only got time for one of you to answer one. So who wants to shout for the trustee only time question? How useful is that?
I'm happy to answer that. Yeah, it is. It's useful to book it, to have it there and actually sometimes you don't have to use it. It's quite useful to have the chief executive just with the trustees, and it needs to not be seen as a a scoring meeting where you're grading or talking about anything. It needs to be a non-threatening thing, but the executive needs to know about it, and it needs to be available to people. But I think it can be seen as a scary kind of second chamber, and you really want to avoid that. So use it, but use it lightly, is I guess what I'd say.
Brilliant. Thank you.
In terms of handovers and all of that sort of thing, I think be honest. You're not the person who's going to do the recruitment of the next chair. You have to step out of the way at this point and let the organisation get on with it. In my opinion, the chief executive should be part of the process of employing a new chair, and I don't understand when organisations want to keep those two things separate. Do the dull stuff so that the incoming person isn't having to deal with, committees that don't work, accountability that's not clear. Actually get that stuff out of the way for somebody and talk about the fun of doing the job and the delight of doing the job.
Brilliant. Okay, so finally, your top tips. Maura, you've got the mic. Do you want to just keep going? Your top tip for chairs.
Top tip. I think adaptability is a key skill. That doesn't mean decisions shouldn't be taken without thought. And I think René's point about saying it's okay to pause here, that is your role as a chair, fundamentally. It's to create enough space for people to breathe metaphorically in real life. It's just to calm the things down when it feels very frenetic and when your chief exec is holding so much stuff in their heads. So for me, that's probably the top tip. I can do loads of others, but let's stay with one.
Brilliant.
And mine would be, don't go for misplaced concreteness. That is, you think you've got a strategy, you want to get it all refined in all detail, you want all your targets set, and you want the wave stations and the leading indicators and all that. You do not know. It's enough really to get those first few steps in place, know your direction of travel, know the destination you're headed for, and realize you're going to iterate and be flexible and agile as you move through that process. Don't feel you have to nail it all down, pin it to the wall, and that becomes the catechism for your strategy going forward.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much. It's been an incredibly rich conversation. We will be sharing the recording afterwards, and it will go up onto our YouTube channel, because I think I feel like I need to watch it again and again to just really squeeze all of the value out of that. Thank you so much for being so generous in sharing your experience, and thank you everybody for your contributions and brilliant questions throughout. We'll continue to let you know of upcoming webinars, part of our offer back out to the social sector, and we love talking to inspiring leaders. So thank you again for your time today. Have a good evening, everybody.